Oh yes, just in case you were wondering, we're keeping up with the book. And so, as we have talked about spirit and the unity of the divine feminine and masculine, that God is, that spirit is, the love and the law. Today we talk about the body. So here we go.
Well, quite often when we talk about this whole process in the science of mind, we use the teaching symbol and we talk about the fact that God is all that is, and it passes through the law, it becomes manifest form, and we quite often then think that, well, when we get down to the manifest form, that's pretty much the end of the cycle. Do we kind of feel that way? Once something becomes form, here he is, we can experience it, here we are, and we get to know how we are and what it is. Right?
No.
No.
Sort of.
The truth is, the body is not the end of the cycle, because it is indeed a cycle, which means it's a circulatory system, which means it goes back up into where it was, the infinite realm of possibility to start with. So things don't ever really stop at one place, although we quite often think when things become manifest form, they're pretty much a solid thing. It just kind of sits there until it rusts and falls apart. But it is still part of universal energy, and it returns back to universal energy when the thought energy, which is holding it in place, the consciousness, which is holding it where it is released and lets it go back into unformed substance. So it's not the final step. It's like water. Water has three different major elements. It is vapor, unseen. We don't really know it's there unless it gets really humid. At that point, it begins to collect together and create water, falls down, becomes water on land, and if it gets cold enough, it turns into ice. But eventually, thanks to global warming, it goes back into vapor again. It begins the whole process all over again. A few weeks, maybe a couple weeks ago, I talked about the terrarium idea that things are constantly circling around. Well, the idea of the Christian concept of Trinity really kind of falls into that, and so does our triune nature idea. In the idea of Trinity in the Christian tradition, God is all that is, that which is seen and unseen. We have God the Son, which is Jesus entering into life as God made flesh in the physical form. And we have the Holy Spirit, which is that part in between in which we interact or communicate with God the Father. It's basically that same basic three-phase idea, same as ice and water and vapor and us and God and the law. I like the idea that we can actually communicate with the divine. That's a little bit different than in most traditional Christian ideas, where God is a little bit separate. Yes, we can pray to God, but God is definitely a separate entity, and we recognize God as being within us. But I don't think there's more of a sense of separation. I think quite often in a lot of traditional Christian thought and a lot of other spiritual thoughts. Science of mind definitely believes that we are God in human form, and so Jesus was not God's only son. We are experiencing the sonship of the divine essence of all that is, and every day of our lives. To think of Jesus as being separate from us as a divine, we are the example, Jesus is the exception, kind of wipes out what is the point to me? What is the point of Jesus being the exception to the law? And I don't think Jesus ever taught that. Jesus taught the fact that he was the example, and everything he could do, we could do as well, and we do. Einstein says there are two ways of looking at life. One is that there are no miracles, and the other is that everything is a miracle. And I think Jesus kind of fell in the middle of that idea. And were the works that Jesus did miracles that we can't do? That was not his perspective. His perspective was anything that I can do, you can do as well. And I'm here to teach you how to do that. I think quite often we get lost in that thinking and think, well, Jesus did miracles and we can't do miracles, and so therefore Jesus is greater than we are. And Jesus was saying, I am physical form exactly the way you are, and all these things that I can do, you can do. And he would ask the question, where is your faith? Or he would make statements like, "O ye of little faith, if you would just believe, you could do these things as well." I believe that's a part that quite often gets lost in the translation. So if he were more than physical entity as we are, he would not be an example, and he would not emulate and relate to our true nature, our divinity, the truth of who we are. When we look at Jesus and we see God in human form, we can relate the godness in our physical nature of who we are, and all of a sudden everything makes sense. So the point of the triune nature is to understand God in us and God as us. Now we don't always see that. We don't always see the miracles that are happening around us. I remember when I was 10 years old, I had a friend, Jeff, and Jeff was a city boy and I was from the country, and Jeff came out to the farm to visit for a couple of days, and I was showing him all around the farm or up in the barn, and we walked up in the hayloft, and we came to the edge, and I came down the ladder, and I'm coming down the ladder very carefully, and all of a sudden I heard this thump behind me. Jeff jumped from the hayloft down, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't imagine such a thing. I'm halfway down the ladder, and here's Jeff standing behind me, and I said, "Did you really just jump from the hayloft?" He goes, "Yeah, only like 7 feet." And to me, it was a miracle that he was standing behind me alive. I learned something from Jeff that day. I did not come the rest of the way down the ladder. I went up and jumped. And I am here to prove that I didn't die. But that was amazing to me. Later on in the years when I was doing construction, quite often I would come to the edge of the roof, and if the ladder wasn't on this side of the house or something, I would just jump off. And it amazed people sometimes, but it was only like 7, 8 feet. What's the big deal? Nowadays, I would think twice. And I'm sure our son Shane, if he saw this, would be laughing, because he remembers the time I was sitting on the edge of his boat in his driveway and slid off and landed on my knee. So, but yeah, nowadays I'm a little smarter. I may not do those things. Or maybe I'm just aware of my more frailty. But
Exercise.
I also had this friend named Doug, and Doug rode a bicycle, and he taught me how to do a wheelie. Something I had never even thought was possible, riding a wheelie on a bicycle and going as far as he possibly could. Doug also had a unicycle. That was amazing to me. And I was able to get up on it, but I was not able to stay there. Doug also played the violin. And that was like the most amazing thing I had ever seen and heard. And I eventually did learn how to play a violin. Not well. But I did learn how to do all those things were possibilities that I never thought as personal possibilities. Things that I saw others do, but I never really realized that I could do. The point of seeing other expressions of God in human form allowed me to realize there are possibilities that I could do to expand my awareness of what this whole life experience is all about. Ernest Holmes says in Living the Science of Mind, we find this saying in the Upanishad: the silent one, the knower, ever resting in us, may walk, stand, sit, lie down, and not do anything at his sweet will. He goes on to say, this all-conquering power of the Spirit finds self-expression through man. This supreme being is at the center of each one of us. To it, we may come for guidance, and from it, we may draw both inspiration and the power to live, stand, walk, or sit. Every act is an outcome of consciousness. Every movement is within the divine being. And since the divine being is everywhere, it must also be at the center of our own life. It is not only at the center of our own life, it is that center. Hence, to think of it as the very essence of our being is clear thinking. To know that its being is our being is right knowing. and to declare that its life is our life is to permit its power to flow through us. We in human form are not separate from the divine possibility. We are the divine possibility. We are the divine essence of all that is, showing up in a different form. We may be ice, we may be vapor, we may be water, we may be human, we may be something else. We are just infinite possibilities. And when we look at the other possibilities, the other body experiences around us, we learn about the diversity of all that is.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
I love doing this thing called life with you.
You're a beautiful possibility.
That you made manifest. Another wonderful teacher in this teaching, Reverend Dr. Dennis Merritt Jones, wrote this week. I believe he wrote it this week. He said, "Your body is the device with which your soul touches the earth. Treat it well." Wow, isn't that beautiful? He writes books too if you're interested. Ernest Holmes wrote, "Body is always an effect, never a cause. Body expresses intelligence, its apparent intelligence being lent by the consciousness which permeates it." That's us in our experience. We would not say that consciousness is in the body, but rather that body is in consciousness. So most of my talk is coming from ideas from an article I read from Dr. Holmes, where he gave a talk on the radio many, many moons ago called this thing called life. And I want to take us back just a little bit into last week's idea of mind, and the idea that the law of mind governs all mental action. The law of mind governs all mental action. Einstein wrote that if time, space, and light bend back upon themselves, then our thought will return to us. And that is really the essence of what I'm talking about today. The idea that our thoughts are so powerful and so magnificent. So Jesus also said that, told us the idea that if we want something good to happen, we have to accept that it is happening. Now, implied in that is the idea that there is a law, although I don't recall him calling it a law, but there is a law that brings back to you the direct result of your thinking. And he also said, pray believing. Pray believing. I think we've done a lot of that today. There is an understanding that the nature of God wills no ill against any of us, that the laws are always for us and not ever against us, and it is our use of them that produces for us either pain or pleasure. And so as we learn to live in harmony with the laws and we learn to better understand the law becomes our servant instead of our master. Until we actually learn to use the law, we may think and make comments like, well, it was God's will. Well, it maybe was, but it was God's will through your thought. And so it's looking at how we're using our thought to create our life purposefully. And if we have misused the law, and do you remember that song, I fought the law and the law won? That is so true. Now, I don't know that whoever wrote it was a science of mind kind of guy or gal, but they were, whether they knew it or not. Because that saying is just so true. And likewise, when we use the law for good, we experience that good. And we can just as easily give thought to constructive ideas that bring our desire about as we can an idea that misuses the law. So realization is our third step in prayer or treatment in our teaching, from the idea that God is all that is, to the understanding that I am of that since it is all that is, to the stage of realizing. And in the realization process, we are stepping into freedom. We're stepping into knowing the positive in our life and the lives of our loved ones. And this realizing, bringing about the sense of freedom, is a direct bearing upon the health and the happiness and the success that we enjoy. Now here's a little example that I experienced this week that kind of brought that word success to my mind. I had a few students this week who were not making wise choices, and so I let them know that it was my job to help them reach success. And one of the little boys kind of put his hand up and turned his head a little bit and sarcastically under his breath said, "Success, right." And I thought to myself, well, your choices made whatever kind of success it is that you're having right now. So if you're not liking the result, the consequence, the punishment, whatever you want to call it, then maybe you want to make a different choice. And that same thing is true for us. And I do believe, to the degree that we can empower our youth to know that they have this power and to use it constructively, to use it wisely, to use it with a heart full of love, is how we're going to change the world. The universe is always our ally. Now, I don't always say something when friends make a comment like, well, I really believe that God was testing me here this last year. I don't say anything because that's their faith. Maybe there's some reason that they need to hold on to that. But I definitely, immediately go into thought of prayer knowing you deserve all good. You deserve all good. You are a perfect, loving, whole, complete person in your own right, and you own all the power. And I just know that silently for them. Because the truth is that the universe is always our ally. It always says yes to whatever seeds we plant. So, when I was young, I grew up in that era, and I bet a lot of you can relate to this. I grew up in that era where there were many people that were saying things like, money doesn't grow on trees, you know. And if you want too much, maybe you're a little too selfish, a little too stingy, implying that there's something the matter with you. It took me years to dare to tithe. Now, if you don't know, tithing is giving 10% of whatever you make. So, that idea of abundance, the universe is abundant. I doubt that anyone would disagree with that. It is all that is. That's a lot of abundance, isn't it? And so if we are of that, how can we possibly experience lack? But when we grow up with that mindset, that's the seed planted. And then when we meet someone who says, well, it's your thoughts that create what you're experiencing. And you're like, oh, no, it's not. It's because I have way too many bills and I don't even know where they all come from and my bank account doesn't match with what needs to go out. Blah, blah, blah. Keep on affirming that, baby, and you will keep on experiencing it. It's changing the thought to align with the law that says it's all yours. It is an abundant universe, and it is all yours. This is your life, your universe. You are an individual within it. And however much you have takes nothing away from anyone else. Now, I've told you before that I have a friend that will say to me, well, how can you even say that? Because, like, I mean, no bad to you, but, like, look at your house. And I'm like, yeah? What's the matter with my house? Well, you know. No, you go ahead and tell me your opinion. And I'm fine with that. There's nothing the matter with it. The thing is, we have a different idea for what wealth is. For her, it's a house, or at least part of it is, or what her house looks like or has in it, or how much it costs. For me, it is not. Cars, same thing. It is the idea that life is abundant. And I'm going to tell you that the first time that I decided, okay, I think I'm going to do this thing called tithing, I looked at my income and I said, how can I possibly tithe? Because I already don't have enough at the end of the month, at the end of that paycheck. How can I possibly tithe? And what I came to understand is, how can I possibly not? And since I wasn't giving back to that source of spiritual good that I was gleaming from life, I was having those thoughts, those same thoughts from that belief system that there's not enough to go around and money doesn't grow on trees. I will tell you today, I never worry about money. No matter what's going on in life, I never worry about it. It always shows up. And money is just one thing. Everything in our life is about knowing that the universe is our ally. There is a power for good and an irresistible law of love. And so I put mirrors under the chairs, and if you're so inclined, before you leave today, you might like to take that mirror and just look at yourself. And before you leave today, affirm a few things that you are going to know about yourself, about your life, before you leave. And know it as a prayer, know it as a thought that the law will and is saying yes to. And listen to this last Ernest Holmes quote. Never be astonished when prayer is answered. Be surprised when it isn't, and find out where you went wrong. And so it is.
So it is.